Chapter 9. Pinnacle of Perfection. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed. Bhagavad Gita 9:2. We arrive now at the culmination of the Son of God's trial in the wilderness. The preceding chapters establish the perfect servant's absolute obedience, his immunity to the lures of passion and greed, and his mastery over the pride of secular knowledge. Satan has exhausted his arsenal of gross physical temptations, military spectacle, and philosophical sophistry. He now faces a final, desperate confrontation in Milton's Book 4, testing the very core of the Son's spiritual identity and faith. This ultimate test serves to illuminate the supreme secret of spiritual life, that true freedom, peace, and liberation are achieved only through complete surrender and pure devotional service. This highest truth is defined in our chapter motto, which encapsulates the entire purpose of the Son's victory. This king of education, devoted service, is the means by which the Son achieves not merely the recovery of a lost garden, but the realization of the paradise within thee, happier far. My father, during a serene morning meditation, once shared, "Son, paradise isn't a place, it's a state within, unlocked by surrender." This chapter, enriched by his wisdom and the Gita's teachings, explores how the Son's final triumph offers a universal blueprint for spiritual perfection, resonating with today's seekers of inner peace. Nature of spiritual testing. Before examining the climactic confrontation, it's essential to understand the progressive nature of spiritual testing that the Son has undergone. Each phase of temptation has addressed increasingly subtle levels of attachment and identification, moving from gross material desires through sophisticated intellectual pride to the ultimate test of spiritual identity itself. This progression mirrors the natural development of spiritual consciousness, where practitioners first learn to regulate obvious material desires, then overcome more sophisticated attachments to knowledge and accomplishment, and finally surrender the most fundamental sense of separate selfhood that underlies all other forms of ego identification. Contemporary spiritual development follows similar patterns. Beginning practitioners often struggle with basic sensory desires: food, entertainment, comfort, security. As practice matures, more refined attachments emerge: desire for spiritual experiences, pride in spiritual knowledge, attachment to spiritual identity and status within communities. The most advanced testing involves surrendering the ultimate sense of being the doer, controller, or enjoyer of spiritual attainment itself. The night of terrors. As the temptations of wealth and logic fail, Satan unleashes his raw, infernal power in a desperate attempt to break the Son through fear and physical torment. Night descends with terrors. Infernal ghosts and hellish furies round environ thee. Some howled, some yelled, some shrieked. The natural world responds to the dark assault. The vexed wilderness, whose tallest pines bowed their stiff necks. Yet, amidst this chaotic supernatural assault, the Son remains perfectly stable. He sat unappalled in calm and sinless peace, conquering material dualities. This scene vividly illustrates the achievement of conquering the material dualities that constantly disturb conditioned consciousness. The ordinary soul is perpetually tossed by pairs of opposites: happiness and distress, honor and dishonor, heat and cold, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. These dualities create the basic psychological instability that underlies most human suffering and prevents sustained spiritual focus. The Son's unflinching endurance, particularly in this trial of fear, demonstrates his eligibility for liberation. The Gita confirms that one who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. In today's world, this mirrors meditators who maintain calm during personal crises, emergency responders who function effectively under extreme stress, or individuals who face life-threatening illness with equanimity. The psychology of fear. Fear represents one of the most primitive and powerful emotions, designed by nature to protect the body from physical harm. However, when consciousness identifies primarily with the temporary physical form rather than the eternal spiritual self, fear becomes a chronic condition that limits both personal development and service capacity. The son's fearlessness doesn't represent insensitivity or recklessness, but rather perfect confidence in his relationship with the divine. When consciousness is rooted in eternal spiritual identity rather than temporary material circumstances, external threats lose their power to disturb inner peace. This doesn't mean ignoring practical dangers, but rather responding to them from a place of calm wisdom rather than panicked reactivity. Contemporary applications include healthcare workers who serve patients during disease outbreaks, activists who challenge oppressive systems despite personal risk, parents who make difficult decisions for their children's long-term welfare, or individuals who leave comfortable but unfulfilling situations to pursue their authentic calling. In each case, spiritual courage emerges from connection to purposes greater than personal comfort or security. Transcendental consciousness in crisis. The son's physical and mental stability proves that he is situated in a transcendental state of consciousness, entirely fixed in spiritual awareness. Furthermore, he has completely conquered fear, an essential quality of one born with divine nature. He later dismisses the terrors Satan presented, saying, "Me worse than what thou find'st not, other harm those terrors which thou speak'st of did me none. I never feared they could." This freedom from fear stems from the realized knowledge that he is the eternal servant of the Supreme Controller, and nothing in the material world, whether physical storm or infernal phantasm, can touch the soul. The eternal self is never born and never dies, cannot be cut by weapons, burned by fire, wetted by water, or dried by wind. When consciousness is established in this understanding, external circumstances lose their power to create fundamental disturbance. The son is operating under superior direction, where all activities done in spiritual consciousness are free from the reactions of pious or impious actions and therefore auspicious. This principle appears in contemporary examples of individuals who face extreme challenges with remarkable serenity. First responders who maintain calm effectiveness during disasters, medical professionals who serve terminal patients with peaceful compassion, or spiritual teachers who continue their service despite persecution or misunderstanding. Having failed to terrify the son, Satan, desperate and acknowledged as having all his devices bent, performs the ultimate symbolic challenge. He carries the son to the pinnacle of the temple and demands a display of sensational power, stating the ultimate challenge to his faith and identity, "For Son of God to me is yet in doubt." The temptation of false ego. This demand aims to provoke the son into action driven by false ego, the fundamental misidentification of the self with temporary roles, abilities, or achievements. Satan seeks to compel the son to prove his divinity through a self-serving, miraculous feat, satisfying the tempter's curiosity and demonstrating independence from the Father's explicit will. Such a feat would be unauthorized action, performed out of pride and the desire for recognition. This temptation appears particularly subtle because it seems to serve a reasonable purpose, demonstrating divine identity to resolve doubt. However, the son recognizes that authentic spiritual identity doesn't require external validation or spectacular demonstration. True spiritual realization manifests through consistent character and service rather than impressive displays designed to convince skeptics. The psychology of false ego underlies most spiritual distortions. Practitioner who uses spiritual attainments to impress others, the teacher who emphasizes their own realization rather than students' development, or the community leader who exploits spiritual authority for personal advantage all demonstrate how noble activities can serve ignoble purposes when motivated by ego gratification. The subtlety of spiritual pride. The demoniac mentality which the Gita describes thinks, "So much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more. I am the Lord of everything, I am the enjoyer." While this attitude obviously appears in material contexts, it can equally manifest in spiritual environments. "So much spiritual knowledge do I have, and I will gain more. I am the most advanced practitioner, I am the true understander of these teachings." Contemporary spiritual communities frequently struggle with these dynamics. Practitioners may compete over who meditates longer, demonstrates greater scriptural knowledge, receives more recognition from teachers, or achieves more impressive spiritual experiences. Teachers may compete for larger followings, more prestigious positions, or greater influence within spiritual organizations. Even sincere seekers may find themselves attached to their spiritual identity in ways that subtly serve ego gratification rather than authentic surrender. The Son, however, rejects this temptation, standing firm in his identity as the Father's servant. His response, "Tempt not the Lord thy God," reflects his realization that his power is derived from divine authority, not personal pride. This aligns with the Gita's teaching that while the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains, which the Son transcends by focusing on divine will rather than personal validation. The victory of humble submission. The Son's refusal to perform the spectacular feat, trusting instead in the Father's plan, marks his complete conquest of false ego. The text states that one who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled though he kills these people, he does not kill. This paradoxical teaching indicates that when actions flow from divine will rather than personal motivation, they transcend the ordinary moral categories that apply to ego-driven behavior. His victory lies in his humility, as he leaves the outcome to his due time and providence. My father once said, "Humility is the crown of strength, wear it and you rule the soul." This resonates with leaders who exercise authority through service rather than domination, teachers who inspire through example rather than impressive displays, or practitioners who find strength through surrender rather than assertion. This humility shouldn't be confused with weakness or self-deprecation. The Son demonstrates perfect confidence in his identity and mission while simultaneously acknowledging his dependence on divine will for their fulfillment. This balance between spiritual confidence and humble dependence characterizes mature spiritual realization. Satan's final defeat prompts a heavenly vision, where the Son is ministered to by angels, confirming his divine status while demonstrating the natural result of authentic spiritual surrender. This moment reveals the supreme secret, the path of devoted service as the pinnacle of spiritual life. The essence of devoted service. The Gita defines this secret as the king of education knowledge so pure it gives direct perception of the self through realization. It is the perfection of religion, everlasting and joyfully performed. The Son's surrender to the Father's will exemplifies this, as he acts without attachment to results, offering everything to divine service. Unlike other forms of knowledge that require extensive preparation, complex techniques, or sophisticated understanding, devoted service is accessible to anyone with sincere intention. A child offering flowers with love, a parent caring for family members with attention to their spiritual welfare, or an elderly person chanting simple prayers can engage in this king of education as fully as scholars who study scriptures for decades. The universal accessibility of devoted service makes it particularly relevant for contemporary practitioners who may feel excluded from traditional spiritual paths due to educational limitations, cultural barriers, or life circumstances that prevent extensive formal practice. The essence lies not in external qualifications but in the quality of consciousness with which activities are performed. The science of divine love. The instruction indicates that one who works in devotion attains the supreme. This involves giving up attachment to work, not the work itself, performed with intelligence for divine satisfaction, a practice called proper renunciation. The Son demonstrates that even in a fallen world, one can align all daily activities with spiritual consciousness, taking divine command as the prime duty of life. This principle appears throughout spiritual traditions under various names: loving service in Christianity, compassionate action in Buddhism, selfless service, seva, in Sikhism, or devoted work, karma yoga, in Hinduism. Each tradition recognizes that the consciousness with which we perform activities matters more than the activities themselves. Contemporary applications include healthcare workers who see their patients as manifestations of the divine deserving reverent care, teachers who view education as sacred service to developing souls, business owners who operate their enterprises as opportunities to serve society's needs, or parents who raise children with conscious attention to supporting their spiritual development alongside material welfare. The transformation of activities. The beauty of devoted service lies in its capacity to transform ordinary activities into spiritual practice without requiring withdrawal from normal responsibilities. the office worker who performs their job with attention to serving customers' genuine needs, the student who studies with gratitude for the opportunity to develop their abilities, or the homemaker who maintains their living space as a sanctuary for family members' well-being, all engage in authentic spiritual practice. This transformation occurs through a shift in consciousness rather than change in external activities. The same physical actions that previously served only personal advancement or ego gratification become offerings of love when performed with proper understanding and motivation. This accessibility makes devoted service particularly valuable for people whose life circumstances prevent extensive formal spiritual practices. The son's final victory secures his position as a pure devotee of the divine. While the universal form of the Supreme may be seen with some devotion mixed with speculation, the personal form of the divine is still more difficult to see, even for exalted beings. The son's immediate return to his proper state signifies the intimate, direct relationship achieved through unalloyed devotion. Beyond impersonal realization, many spiritual paths emphasize the impersonal aspect of the divine, the formless, attributeless absolute that underlies all manifestations. While this understanding serves important purposes, particularly in transcending limited material conceptions, it represents only a preliminary stage of spiritual realization. The ultimate goal involves personal relationship with the divine as the source and object of love rather than merely an abstract principle to be understood intellectually. The son's relationship with the Father exemplifies this personal dimension. His surrender isn't merely philosophical acceptance of cosmic principles but loving response to a divine person who cares for him individually. This relationship provides both the motivation for spiritual practice and its ultimate fulfillment. Contemporary practitioners can cultivate similar personal relationships through prayer, meditation, service, and study approached as communion with a loving divine rather than merely techniques for personal improvement. This shift from utilizing spiritual practices for personal benefit to engaging them as expressions of love fundamentally transforms both the practice experience and its results. The guarantee of divine reciprocation. This relationship is guaranteed to those engaged in pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity. The divine responds to sincere love with unlimited reciprocation, providing both the guidance needed for spiritual development and the ultimate goal of eternal association. This reciprocation appears in the lives of authentic practitioners as increased clarity about life purpose, growing capacity for selfless service, deeper peace amid challenging circumstances, and gradual transformation of character in the direction of divine qualities. Unlike the forced effort that characterizes much spiritual practice, devoted service generates its own momentum as practitioners discover that serving the divine provides greater satisfaction than any material pleasure. Having successfully overcome temptation, the son returns not with the spoils of war but with the eternal victory secured within his consciousness. The angels sing, affirming that by vanquishing temptation, he has regained lost paradise. The promise of internal perfection. The promise of a fairer paradise is founded now for Adam and his chosen sons, which is happier than Eden, refers to the internal state of spiritual perfection rather than any external garden or location. The goal is the cessation of material identification through realizing one's spiritual identity, a state achieved by those who are happy from within and fixed in the spiritual sanctuary found within the heart. This internal paradise remains accessible regardless of external circumstances. Practitioners may face illness, poverty, social rejection, or other material difficulties while simultaneously experiencing increasing spiritual satisfaction and peace. The source of happiness shifts from dependence on favorable external conditions to connection with the inexhaustible love and joy of the divine. Contemporary examples include individuals who maintain remarkable peace and purpose despite severe physical limitations, prisoners who discover spiritual freedom within confinement, patients who find meaning and joy despite terminal diagnoses, or elderly people who radiate wisdom and contentment despite loss of material capabilities. These examples demonstrate that the essential human happiness doesn't depend on external paradise but on internal connection with the divine. The eternal achievement. The spiritual self is eternal and can never be slain. Unlike material accomplishments that are lost at death, spiritual realization represents permanent achievement that enhances rather than diminishes with time. The sun's achievement of inner peace demonstrates that he has successfully controlled desire and anger, thereby entering a transcendental state that is both immediate and eternal. This permanence provides profound comfort for practitioners who may feel discouraged by the slowness of spiritual progress or the apparent insignificance of their daily spiritual practices. Every moment of sincere spiritual effort contributes to eternal development that cannot be destroyed by material circumstances or the passage of time. The Gita assures that even a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear, the fear that life lacks ultimate meaning or purpose. When practitioners understand that their spiritual development continues beyond physical death, and that their loving service creates eternal value, temporary setbacks and material losses lose their power to create despair. The sun's triumph provides practical guidance for contemporary spiritual seekers facing the challenges of maintaining spiritual focus while fulfilling material responsibilities in a complex, often chaotic world. The gradual process of surrender. While the sun demonstrates perfect surrender from the beginning of his trials, his example provides guidance for the gradual process of surrender that characterizes most spiritual development. Each temptation he overcomes represents a stage in the progressive refinement of consciousness that sincere practitioners can expect to experience. The initial focus on regulating gross material desires gradually gives way to addressing subtler attachments to recognition, understanding, and spiritual achievement. Finally, practitioners learn to surrender the sense of being the doer or controller of their spiritual progress, understanding that authentic advancement comes through divine grace rather than personal effort alone. This understanding prevents both spiritual pride, thinking we have achieved realization through our own power, and spiritual discouragement, thinking our efforts are insufficient to produce meaningful progress. Instead, practitioners learn to do their best while depending on divine assistance for results, creating a sustainable approach that avoids both false ego inflation and hopeless frustration. The social dimension of realization. The sun's victory benefits not only himself but all of humanity, demonstrating that authentic spiritual realization naturally serves the welfare of others. His triumph over temptation creates possibilities for others' spiritual advancement, showing that individual spiritual development and collective welfare are intimately connected. Contemporary practitioners who sincerely engage in devoted service often find that their spiritual development enhances their capacity to contribute to family welfare, community improvement, and social justice. As consciousness becomes purified of self-centered motivations, natural compassion and wisdom emerge that benefit everyone they encounter. This social dimension prevents spiritual practice from becoming self-absorbed escapism while ensuring that social engagement remains rooted in spiritual principles rather than mere material activism. The most effective social servants are often those who maintain strong spiritual practice, while the most advanced spiritual practitioners naturally express their realization through loving service to others. The sun's triumph carries particular relevance for contemporary spiritual seekers who live in an age of unprecedented material prosperity yet widespread spiritual confusion and dissatisfaction. The simplicity of the path. Despite the sophisticated philosophical framework we've explored, the actual practice of devoted service remains remarkably simple. It requires no special equipment, extensive education, or unusual life circumstances. Anyone can begin immediately by offering their current activities to the divine with gratitude and the intention to serve rather than merely satisfy personal desires. This simplicity makes the path accessible to people across all educational, cultural, economic, and social backgrounds. A janitor who cleans with attention to creating beautiful, healthy environments for others, a CEO who operates a company as service to society's needs, a student who studies with gratitude for the opportunity to develop their abilities, or a retiree who volunteers time to support community welfare all engage in the same essential practice. While the ultimate goal of devoted service is eternal association with the divine, practitioners typically experience immediate benefits that enhance their daily life experience. These include reduced anxiety. When the burden of achieving specific outcomes shifts from personal effort to divine assistance, chronic worry about results naturally diminishes. Increased energy. Activities performed as expressions of love rather than mere obligations generate enthusiasm and vitality rather than depleting energy reserves. Improved relationships. When others are seen as opportunities for service rather than sources of personal satisfaction, relationships become more harmonious and fulfilling for everyone involved. Greater resilience. When happiness depends on internal spiritual connection rather than external circumstances, temporary setbacks lose their power to create lasting disturbance. Enhanced creativity. When activities serve larger purposes rather than narrow self-interest, creative solutions and innovative approaches emerge more naturally. Deeper meaning. When daily activities connect to eternal purposes, even routine tasks become meaningful and satisfying. The progressive nature of realization. While devoted service can begin immediately, its full development occurs gradually through consistent practice over extended periods. Practitioners should expect a natural progression from external compliance with spiritual principles toward internal transformation that makes spiritual consciousness spontaneous and effortless. Initially, offering activities to the divine may feel artificial or forced, requiring conscious effort to remember spiritual intentions amid material responsibilities. Gradually, this consciousness becomes more natural as practitioners experience the superior satisfaction that comes from serving larger purposes rather than narrow self-interest. Eventually, the distinction between spiritual practice and ordinary activity dissolves as all activities become expressions of love for the divine. This represents the ultimate goal toward which the sun's example points, a state where every moment provides opportunities for spiritual expression and every activity contributes to eternal spiritual development. Conclusion: the eternal victory. The sun's final triumph establishes the ultimate teaching of paradise regained, that the paradise lost through disobedience can be regained through surrender, not to material pleasure or intellectual achievement, but to the supreme source of all existence. This victory is available to every sincere seeker through the practice of devoted service performed with faith, love, and dedication to the welfare of all beings. The knowledge demonstrated by the sun is indeed the king of education, simple enough for anyone to practice yet profound enough to provide complete spiritual fulfillment. By engaging in this practice, contemporary seekers can discover the same paradise within that the sun realized, transforming their daily lives into continuous spiritual celebration while preparing for the ultimate destination of eternal association with the divine. The message of paradise regained through devoted service is both ancient and eternally fresh, both simple and infinitely profound. It offers hope to all who struggle with the limitations of material existence while providing practical guidance for transforming those very limitations into stepping stones toward eternal spiritual realization. In following the sun's example of humble surrender and loving service, every sincere practitioner can recover their own lost paradise and discover the infinite joy that is their spiritual birthright.